Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels, and yes, we are getting back to our Down the Rabbit Hole series, continuing on with Dr. Andrew Wakefield's determination by the GMC in regards to serious professional misconduct in regards to the 1998 clinical study that was published in the Lancet paper. So this has been one of the most damning documents I've ever read, and I've read stuff on the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center. But we're going to go ahead and continue on. If I reread anything, I apologize about that in advance. I have kind of slept since last Friday. But anyways, let me go where we left off here. In considering what, if any, sanction apply, the panel was mindful at all times of the need for proportionality and the public interest, which includes not only the protection of patients and public at large, but also setting and maintaining standards within the medical profession, as well as safeguarding its reputation and maintaining its public confidence in the profession. Please, for the love of God, let this be a lesson to you all. Media, talking to you. Confirm, reconfirm, and confirm a third time before you allow any new information to go forward, especially when it has to do with the public health like this. Because, yes, he was found guilty of all this misconduct in 2010. There should have been a hell of a lot better work done in reviewing that clinical study from the Lancet before it was allowed to be published. I hope this is now a, a teaching moment, if you will, and that since then we don't just simply allow clinical studies to go through and be published before they are properly vetted first. Because by this time, the cat was already out of the bag. And because it happened so much later, the true believers, as I've called them on multiple occasions, have simply used it as a way to turn this absolute fraud into a martyr. And they're still doing it. I've gone undercover a few times back in the day on message boards and shit when all this was going down, and that's what they do. They exalt him as a martyr. Here's the thing: once you publish something, people usually take and run with the first thing you publish. Even if you followed it up with a refutation immediately afterwards, most people are not even going to see that that is something that has been done. They're going to go with what was published originally. Okay? Because then any contradictions afterward can always be played, especially these days, as fake news, whether it actually is or not. So learn from this and quit putting information out there before it's been properly vetted, because by the time you come back to refute what you've already let out, the damage has already been done. And your opposition has already had more than enough time to come up with a narrative that still paints them as the great martyr. Because Andrew Wakefield is doing that to this day. This fraud is trusted more right now than individuals like Fauci. Yeah, I know. All the conspiracy theories. Okay? They have no evidence to back them up whatsoever. Okay? But, anyways, chalk that up, guys, to one of the things that I am going to say on this channel that may offend you. Speaking of which, I forgot my trigger warnings, folks, and I just dived right in. I apologize about that. Everything we go over in regards to the Down the Rabbit Hole series, in regards to the reemergence of the uh, anti-vax movement, you'll find right there in the description box with their appropriate links. So if anyone wants to know where my sources are, where I'm getting that information that I'm showing you, it's right there. Okay? Also, folks, we do have the channel marked not for kids for a reason. I do use profanity. And some of the topics we cover, like the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, are pretty dark. So if your child is 16 and younger and watching this, parental supervision is advised. All right. Now, let me go ahead and continue here. It bore in mind that the purpose of sanctions is not punitive, although that might be their effect. Let's go ahead and continue here. The panel noted submissions of GMC counsel that the appropriate and proportionate sanction would be erasure in light of his serious and wide-ranging misconduct. However, the panel accepted the legal assessor's advice that this was only a submission on the behalf of the GMC, and it was for the panel to make up its own mind. Dr. Wakefield's counsel did not make any substantive submissions on his behalf. The panel went on to consider whether it should, pursuant to Rule 31, postpone the case. It received no submissions in this regard and so went on to determine whether it was sufficient to conclude the case without making a direction or with admonition. The panel made findings of transgressions in many aspects of Dr. Wakefield's research. It made findings of dishonesty in regard to his writing of a scientific paper that had major implications for the public health, and with regard to its subsequent representations to a scientific body and to colleagues. Now, what did we learn, media? Triple check your sources before reporting information. Most people are always going to go with the first reported story, even if you refute immediately afterwards. More often than not, people are not going to even see it, and if they do, they're going to chuck it up to conspiracy. I'm sorry, but that's the world we live in now. I really do hope that was a teaching moment. He was dishonest in respect to the lab funds secured for research, as well as being dishonest in respect to, as well as being misleading. Furthermore, he was in breach of his duty to manage finances as well to account for funds that he did not need to the donor of those funds. In causing blood samples to be taken from children at a birthday party, he callously disregarded the pain and distress of the young children might suffer and behaved in a way which brought the profession into disrepute. And may I also mention once more, in regards to the fact that it was done in an area that was not properly sterilized. Nor do we have any confirmation whether the needles that he used in taking those blood samples were sterilized. You are looking at possible contamination of the blood samples, which would pretty much throw your readings out the window. What do you mean, blood samples at a birthday party where I can't be sure where you're getting the blood samples at is sterile, and if it was possible that somehow something from the environment could contaminate the blood sample before it is properly put in its containers? That's just completely insane. All the things that could possibly go wrong that fly through my head, and every last one of them is horrifying. In view of the nature and number and seriousness of the findings, the panel concluded it would be wholly inappropriate to conclude the case without making a direction or with a reprimand. Let us continue here. Looks like we're almost finished with this one, and then we're going to have some other areas we're going to be deep diving into. Let me continue here. It is considered, it next considered under Rule 31 whether it was sufficient to direct that the registration of Dr. Wakefield be conditional on his compliance during a period not exceeding 3 years with such requirements as the panel may think fit to impose for the protection of the members of the public or in his interests. Conditions have to be practical, workable, measurable, and verifiable, and directed at the particular shortcomings identified. The panel concluded that Dr. Wakefield's shortcomings and aggravating factors in this case, including in broad terms the wide-ranging transgressions relating to every aspect of his research, his disregard for clinical interest of vulnerable patients, his failure to heed the warnings he received in relation to the potential conflicts of interest associated with his legal aid board funding, his failure to disclose the patent, his dishonesty and the compounding of that dishonesty in relation to the drafting of the Lancet paper, and his subsequent representations about it, all played out against a background of research involving such major public health implications, could not be addressed by any conditions on his registration. In addition, the panel considered that his actions relating to the taking of blood at a party exemplifies a fundamental failure in the ethical standards expected of a medical practitioner. Go off! Oh my gosh, go off. Yes, please. Hit him again. It concludes that conditional registration would not mark the seriousness of such fundamental failings in his duty as a doctor. The panel next went on to consider whether it would be sufficient to suspend Dr. Wakefield's registration for a period not exceeding 12 months. Dr. Wakefield has demonstrated a persistent lack of insight and has insisted in many instances on his ethical propriety. Where, dude? Where would that be? Is it the land of unicorns? In the context of the referral process and the treatment of children in the research project in which he was engaged, in the context of the funding of the project, with regard to the terminology of the Lancet paper, with regard to his non-declaration of interests, with regard to not acting in the best clinical interest of the Lancet children, and with regard to obtaining blood from children at a birthday party. The panel noted that the sanction of suspension may be appropriate for conduct that falls short of being fundamentally incompatible with continued registration, where there is no evidence of harmful deep-seated or attitudinal problems, and where there is insight and no significant risk of repeating behavior. Although these points have been set out in the GMC's indicative sanctions guidance, which was published subsequent to these events, the panel considered that the guidance outlines the type of sanction appropriate to the gravity of misconduct, and the same principles are applicable to Dr. Wakefield's actions at the material times. The panel considers that Dr. Wakefield's conduct in relation to the facts found falls seriously short of relevant standards, and that suspension would not be sufficient or appropriate against a background of several aggravating factors and an absence of any mitigating submissions made on his behalf. So he's not even trying to fight for himself here. See that? Dr. Wakefield's continued lack of insight as to his misconduct serve only to testify the panel that suspension is not sufficient and that his actions are incompatible with his continued registration as a medical practitioner. Accordingly, the panel has determined that Dr. Wakefield's name should be erased from the medical register. Go panel! That's what I'm talking about. The panel concluded that it is the only sanction that is appropriate to protect patients, and is in the wider public interest, including the maintenance of public trust and the confidence in the profession, and it is proportionate to the serious and wide-ranging findings made against him. The effect of the foregoing direction is that unless Dr. Wakefield exercises his right of appeal, his name will be erased from the medical register 28 days from when the formal notice has been deemed to be served upon him by letter to his registered address. Dr. Wakefield is presently not subject to any interim order on his registration. The panel will hear submissions on whether an immediate order of suspension should be imposed upon him pending the outcome of any appeal. First from Ms. Smith on the behalf of General Medical Counsel, and then from Mr. Coonan on the behalf of the doctor, but we'll do that at the conclusion of the reading of all three determinations. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why is it that in regards to the media, when you're reporting and refuting anti-vax rhetoric, when they speak on Dr. Andrew Wakefield, why do they never report on the particulars in this decision here? Why isn't it reported on that for that particular clinical study that this doctor took blood samples at a birthday party? Because you may have heard Dr. Andrew Wakefield's name here and there, but I don't think you would ever be able to remember them reporting that. Because taking blood samples at a birthday party is the type of thing that tends to stick out in the mind should you hear of it on the evening news. Why wasn't that mentioned? Why isn't his conflict of interest never talked about when it has to do with the fact that he already had a patent on a alternative MMR vaccine ready to go before he began this clinical study? Why hasn't that been reported on? You see, when you leave details like that out, people can paint whatever narrative they want for an individual. If you're a true believer on the anti-vax side of things, you're going to use that to be able to have the ability to paint whatever narrative you want and not really have anything in mainstream media to directly combat it. So they can continue to portray this absolute fraud as a martyr. Because that's what they've done. You can't leave things vague anymore in this world. People get their news from headlines and watching the news at home at night. You leave details like that out, then you give the opposition side the ability to entirely craft the narrative. That's how they were able to take a fraud like this, so absolutely compromised on every single level, and turn him into the martyr. Details like that matter. He may have not ended up with the same loyal following that he has now, that are willing to goose step themselves into following this fraudster Pied Piper straight into the pit. That might not have happened had they had more details when they were reporting in regards to that study being withdrawn. Because even if you're a mom who thinks maybe the vax did it, learning that they were taking blood samples at a birthday party might not have been something you would have been willing to co-sign yourself to. So there will be more, obviously, in regards to Andrew Wakefield to cover so that I can get you guys to where he is, how the narrative's been framed around him now, and how he's been using it. And then we'll also be getting into Jenny McCarthy, and we're going to be talking about all the different snake oil cures, everything like that that has come out of the reemergence of the anti-vax movement, straight from Dr. Wakefield as we go throughout the series. But for tonight, we're going to go ahead and close out. We don't have very many views on this channel, and the few we do get do tend to get removed from time to time. So don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, don't forget to hit the comments, and make sure you do still have that bell clicked for notifications. Tomorrow, of course, we're going right back into the Medicaid series, and on Sunday, we're going to be introducing one of the two new series and getting us start off with that. I don't want you to miss anything. I appreciate your time, and as always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. See you all later. Bye-bye now.